Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevating Your Life. So happy to have you with us today. We have with us today an amazing guest. We have Dr. Linda Backman, and she is featured on Coast to Coast AM and Gaia TV. She's an expert teacher, regression therapist, and licensed psychologist with 47 years of private practice experience, including 30 years of guiding soul regressions. Linda was trained by soul regression pioneer Dr. Michael Newton, and they worked together training other therapists for over 3 years. Linda has conducted thousands of past life and between life soul regressions in person and remotely. She founded the Raven Heart Center and Training Institute in Boulder, Colorado in 1997 and teaches regularly worldwide. She has written multiple books, her most recent, Soul Design, and she is an international expert in understanding how reincarnation plays a pivotal role in our personal growth and humanity's evolution. Oh, exciting stuff. First off, welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Paula. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, so happy to have you here. Well, I would love to have you share, if you like, maybe a little more of your background and maybe what brought you into this. And just kind of it's an amazing the work you do, and I'm very uh interested in and passionate about incarnation, so I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Very good. Well, thank you. Here's the story in a kind of a nutshell version, Paula. So I'm a licensed psychologist by training, and prior to the early 90s, I was basically a conventional psychologist doing what people think a conventional psychologist does in private practice. I didn't understand soul. I didn't understand reincarnation to any extent at all. But I did a lot of death, dying, and grief counseling, which was kind of a stepping stone into what I do now. And so basically, in the spring of 1993, my original psychologist colleague, a man with whom I built a group practice of psychologists and psychiatrists, sadly, from a human standpoint, he passed from a type of lung cancer in April of 93. And within about 48 hours or so of his passing, I began to have, today the lingo is STE, spiritually transformative experience. That's the term that's used today. I began to have spiritual intuitive experiences that I'd never consciously had before. I was in my middle 40s at the time, and I began two basic things started happening for me. I became aware, and I had no doubt that I could feel the energy of my colleague, and he was communicating with me intuitively. I didn't know how that worked. I didn't totally understand back then why that was happening. And I began to see scenes in my mind's eye, in the darkness of my bedroom at night and in the morning. I knew just a little bit about past lives. I began to see scenes intuitively of lives I felt I'd shared with him. So part of me, I kind of had two responses. One was, sort of self-talk the way we do internally. One was, Linda, you're a psychologist, and psychologists don't do this kind of stuff. But the other part of me was fascinated. The other part of me was curious and fascinated and comforted in many ways by sensing my colleague. So I decided, I was married. I'm still married to the same person. My husband and I have always been rather liberal people, but we had never spoken about soul or reincarnation, which today seems kind of strange given what I've done for over 30 years. But so I decided I'd better tell my husband what was going on. So my husband sat down and I began to explain to him what I was experiencing. And as I watched his face, it was clear to me that he wasn't shocked or, didn't think that this was just crazy. So I said to my husband, whose first name is Earl, so I said to Earl, well, based on looking at your face, it looks to me like, you don't think this is strange. Is that correct? And Earl said, "Yeah, that's right." And so I said, "Well, why don't you think this is weird? This is not something we've ever discussed or shared with each other." And so basically, what Earl said to me that day in '93, he said, he said, "I guess I repressed something that happened to me as a child." And when I said, "What do you mean?" Earl said, "Only now, in '93, do I remember," he said, "do I remember what happened to me as a boy?" And Earl said, "Yeah, now I remember that when I was about 10 years old, I'd go outside when I was by myself. I'd go outside, I'd lay on the ground on my back. I would watch the clouds move in the sky, and I began to remember my past lives in detail." And I think I probably back then said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes." And Earl said, "I forgot about it because nobody ever talked about those kinds of things in my life." And Earl said, "I've always believed in reincarnation." So my husband's not a psychologist. He's spent 30 years as a university professor. He's has a PhD in political science. So Earl said, "Well, if you find this interesting, I support you. Go study, go learn, move forward with it." And so, we might say the rest is history. I've been guiding both past life regression, but soul level regression, for about 20 or so years.
Wow, wow. And what would you say are some of the most amazing experiences you've realized about incarnation? I mean, it's just an amazing thing to think about and realize.
I mean, it probably would be easier to talk about specifics. So, because I've been, and I said 20 years, I meant 30 years. I have learned about soul, past lives, how we plan our lives, where we come from, listening, all these many years, multiple times a week, most of the time, to clients discovering who they are, both in their past lives and who they are as souls. And so it helps us to understand where do some of our relationships come from, what might be the cause of some of our health issues, where do skills come from that we never learned in current life. Why do we face complicated circumstances like the loss of someone close to us? So basically, how do we evolve as a soul? What are our past lives? And what are we working on now in our current life?
Wow, wow. So, what would you say to someone listening that's like, oh, I want to know more about that, about myself. I want to know what my soul is working on. What would some of the first steps be for that?
Well, probably sort of three different thoughts come to my mind. One would be to pick up one of my books and perhaps the newest book, which is, the most recent and the most you might say current and progressive book that is filled with client material. So pick up one of my books. That's one way to understand. Consider having a regression. That's another way. And the other is to um, believe and trust that circumstances in your life, whether it's what kind of work have you thought about doing, but your grandfather, your mother, your father did a certain kind of work, and so you followed in their footsteps, but you really would prefer to be a musician or prefer to move halfway around the globe and learn a language or, whatever. Our who we are as a soul and why we're here and our past lives show up in our current life.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, what exactly is soul regression? I mean, detail that a little for me, please.
Yeah. So first, people have to trust that they are intuitive, because we're all intuitive. Most of us aren't taught as we're growing up how to be intuitive and how to trust our intuition. Um, and so the tool of soul regression is the trained therapist, and I teach people how to do this. I teach trainings. The trained regression therapist knows how to guide the client into relaxation. Relaxation is simply a form of letting go. And yes, it's hypnosis, but hypnosis is purely relaxation. We know through brain science that when we relax, whether you're being guided, as would be the case in soul regression, with breathing and body relaxation and metaphor, whether you're being guided to relax or you're relaxing on your own, if you're hooked up to EEG equipment, the EEG reads the cycles per second of your brain. As we relax, whether you're being guided or, spontaneously relaxing, those numbers drop. And as those numbers drop, we drop into what we call deeper brainwave state. And we know through brain scan research that the right hemisphere of our human brain becomes more lit up on a brain scan, meaning it's the right hemisphere of our brain where our intuitive human capability is held. So relaxation is the first step. And then it's simply me guiding the client verbally initially into the first scene of whatever past life their guides want them to know about. And that past life always relates to current life, always includes information about a skill, a past trauma that still exists, a relationship, living somewhere or living at a time in history that fascinates us. So we move through the past life scene by scene. The client tells me about the past life, I don't tell them. And then we go all the way to the ending of the past life, and we follow that natural journey that happens when we pass, when the slice of our soul that resides within us automatically returns back to the higher realm and basically steps back into our soul energy that we call higher self.
Yes, yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. And then, so that kind of brings into play the difference of higher self and human self.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we're when we're born as a baby and we're viable outside of our mother's womb, what causes us to live and breathe is soul energy that resides within us. We never bring 100% of our soul energy into our human bodies. It would blow the circuits of our human bodies. So we bring a portion, a slice, a percentage of our soul energy that causes us to live and breathe at birth. The remainder of our soul is in the higher realm, and that's what we call higher self. And that's one of our guiding forces.
So then come into play our guides. Would you say we all have guides? And is our higher self assisting our guides with our moving forward in our life?
Yeah, so maybe a couple of answers to that, Paula. Um, we always have at least a primary guide. And so we always have at least one spiritual guide. Now, another piece of the picture that I've learned through guiding regression for so many years is that some of us as souls, so, some of us, our souls are what I call an earth-based soul. That means our soul was created and designed to evolve lifetime to lifetime, primarily on earth. Then there are two other types of souls that come into body on earth. One of those other types of souls is a soul that comes from the angelic realm. is a soul that is an angelic being that is part of what we call the angelic realm that directly serves source. We can talk more about that if you want. And then
Yes,
the
I'd
third,
love to.
yeah, and then the third type of soul is I was given the term years ago interplanetary. And people listening can exchange that with ET soul, star seed. It all means the same. There are souls that have evolved somewhere outside of Earth, and they've evolved to the point that and it's always a choice. They evolve to the point of being sufficiently wise and understanding of more healthy behavior. And some interplanetary souls choose to come to Earth. They incarnate as humans. They incarnate as your friend, your neighbor, your family member. Um, but they are souls whose higher selves reside somewhere outside of Earth's frequency. So, to just briefly, I don't want to make this too complicated. Earth-based souls always have a primary spiritual guide that is not their higher self. Interplanetary souls and angelic realm souls are most of the time guided by their higher self because their higher self is so evolved and can serve as their primary guide.
That is so awesome. And I am just, I'm fascinated with angels, and I know they're always around me, and I can be out walking and I see clouds that look like an angel. I love those messages, feathers. Oh my gosh. It's all that, numbers, all that is so fascinating.
Mm.
And so is that a really wonderful thing to watch for those signs and be aware and know that that's a message, it's a sign.
Of course, of course. Though, yes, and I think that, as humans, signs and indications are, you just said it, are ways of our guides and our own soul supporting us, maybe directing us to do something or believe something or trust in something. And so, yes, when you see that configuration of a cloud that looks like an angel, there's some message for you.
Yes, yes. Isn't that a wonderful thing? That is so exciting. So when you see these messages and feel like, okay, there's a message, what do you recommend on, okay, how do I connect to that message? What can I do to step closer to that? What would you say to someone?
I think that's where intuition has to come into play. I think that's where it's like, okay, I'm aware. It's like you're driving down the street and there's a car in front of you and you look at the license plate and either the license plate relates to the name of someone who's special to you or the license plate has a repetitive number that you're aware, it's part of numerology, a number that triggers your awareness. It's usually a guide or a loved one on the other side, trying to get your attention
Yeah,
and support you, give you advice, give you direction. Yeah.
yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh, so something that you a quote, grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, spiritual, and physical necessity. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting you're bringing that up. So that takes me back in my life, Paula, before I fell into spiritual awareness. So I fell into spiritual awareness, about 32 years ago in my middle 40s. Prior to that, in my middle 20s, my husband and I were pregnant with our second baby. That was a very challenging pregnancy. I threatened miscarriage for about 4 months, and I delivered that baby at 26 weeks, and he was born alive, lived a short time, and passed. I wasn't spiritually aware, but that led me into a classic grief process. And so back then, back in the 70s, um, I came to understand what grief feels like.
Mhm.
And I had to understand, I wasn't going crazy. There wasn't anything seriously wrong with me. I had to let myself grieve. As the years went by, and then I later became more spiritually aware and spiritually focused, I realized that, at least in my opinion and from my perspective, grief and loss has to have two components. It has to have that um, normal, everyday emotional component of allowing your feelings to be real and allowing your feelings to be acceptable and basically feeling your feelings.
Yeah.
But the other piece is understanding that when a loved one crosses over, and it actually doesn't have to be a human loved one, it could be an animal, so an animal that was special to you, um, that the soul is immortal. The soul of an animal is immortal, the
Yeah.
soul of a human is immortal. That we, just as I did with my colleague, that we can connect with the soul of a loved one that's passed. And both aspects of grieving, I think, are crucial.
Yes. Yes. And in the clouds context, I also see clouds that look like a dog. And I
Mm,
know it's one of my past beloved dogs
mm,
saying hi. It's fascinating when we just, open up and look for that. And so with incarnation, can an animal be human in one and animal in the other? Or do you think it's like strictly they stay in the animal realm, we stay in the human realm? I've
yeah.
always kind of wondered that.
Yeah, that's people ask me that question fairly often. Um, so basically, and then I'll give you just one kind of exception, you might say, to the rule. Basically, an animal soul is an animal soul, and a human soul is a human soul, and they don't cross over. But what I have found over the years of guiding regression, and as I guide regression, I look for um, in how many regressions did I hear basically the same kind of information? And so, what I suspect, based on what I've heard from clients, is that the species of cetaceans, whales, porpoises, dolphins, that species, that water-based mammal, um, I think very likely that's one exception to the rule that humans can, the what we think of as the human soul can be an incarnation as a
Wow.
cetacean.
Oh, that's amazing. That is just amazing to think about, isn't it? Oh,
Mm,
wow. I love it.
fascinating.
I
Yeah.
love it. This is, our soul energy, all this. It's so fascinating, Linda. And really, it's really exciting to know that our soul energy is immortal. I mean, for me, it puts a smile on my face. It must be fascinating what you've seen over the years. We have about 4 minutes left in the show. Linda, what last message do you want to share with everyone? And if you'd like to share a website or any information, please do so.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I would say to people, trust. Um, Trust the signs and events that show up in your life. Trust that you are intuitive. Trust sort of images in your mind's eye. Trust emotions that come up that seem uncanny but tell you something. Trust body sensation, which is another intuitive sign, and then trust your knowing. Knowing is a classic sign of I need to call this person. I need to take this course. I need to change my line of work, whatever it might be. Trust. And then I would say it would be useful. People will learn a whole lot more. pick up a copy, or it's on Kindle, it's on Audible. It's my fourth book. My newest book is called Soul Design, and people can find it either through my website or through Amazon. My website is ravenheartcenter.com. Ravenheartcenter.com. There, people can find books, the courses that I teach, the times when I'm doing interviews and that kind of thing, as well as guiding regressions.
Now, you mentioned something about being open to physical awareness. What would that be? What would an example of that be
Yeah,
before we go? Yeah,
sometimes our bodies, so the couple of examples that I've had many times over the years. So your spiritual guide is trying to get your attention, and they sometimes our bodies are our sensors. So pay attention to an uncanny popping of your eardrum or a twitching of your eyelid. Pay attention to just example would be my husband's very much this way. He might suddenly feel like a not a horrible stomach issue, but just twinges that just he doesn't know why he's having like tension in his stomach or a little bit of discomfort in his stomach. Sometimes he discovers when he goes to his computer or he reads the news, there was an earthquake halfway around the globe and he's being affected in his body by the energy of the trauma that the earthquake has caused. So our bodies are also receivers of intuitive information.
that is fascinating. I had never heard that. That is really cool. So, in so many ways, we are intuitive of different things, just opening up to that.
Totally. I wish that when children were, oh, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 15, that schools required them to take a class about intuition.
Yeah.
So they would learn to trust this skill that we all have.
I love it. I love it. Oh, Linda, you are just amazing. And thank you for all the fantastic information. I just enjoyed chatting with you. I enjoyed your book. Thank you so much.
Paula, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You are so welcome. Love, hugs, and blessings. And everyone out there, love, hugs, and blessings. Thank you for joining us today.